I'm Roger Kirschner, and I'm currently the chair of the CBRC, and I'm calling this meeting of January 11th uh, to order at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for kicking us off, Roger. I'm so glad we're all here again. It's been a little while since we've all seen each other. So thank you so much for making time on this cold night to come together on Zoom. We just have a quick welcome for new members who are joining us who haven't had a chance to introduce themselves yet, and just a little bit of housekeeping, and then we can get into our agenda. Jen, I believe you haven't been able to introduce yourself in this space yet. Would you like to take a minute to introduce yourself with your pronouns and any background you'd like to offer?
Great, thank you so much. I'm Jen Gray O'Connor. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a parent of two PPS students who are in middle school right now at Selwood Middle School. And my background is in community engagement. And so in a past life, I got to work with Alexandra with the City of Portland Budget Office. I am like a dyed-in-the-wool true believer in the power of advisory committees and public discourse and representation on decision-making about big issues like budget. So I'm super excited to be a participant in working through a review of the budget with you all. And I apologize, my cat is very convinced that she should be a part of not usually this enthusiastic, but I think it's late in the evening and she would like to participate. So apologies for her popping on the video as well.
It's a public meeting. We welcome all the guests. Thank you, Jen. And Luke, you are our student representative. You were appointed along with Mo at Tuesday night's board meeting. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Luke Susswood. My pronouns are he, him. I am a junior at Franklin High School, and I went to Mount Tabor Middle School and Glencoe Elementary School. I've been a PPS student my entire life, and I'm very excited to be serving as one of the student representatives for this board.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you. Appreciate your time here tonight on a school night. Okay, so the only housekeeping I had for tonight was sharing dates for some upcoming meetings. So this is what the next several months will look like for us. I'm proposing the dates that are not bolded, so there's flexibility here. I can go ahead and send these out in a doodle poll so that we can see, how these land with you all as you look at your schedules over the next few months. But I'm proposing February 15th as a regular CBRC meeting, March 14th as another meeting where we can cover content and get everyone ready for the upcoming engagements and work on the CBRC report. And then March 19th is confirmed and will be a CBRC board work session. And we always need several meetings to work on the CBRC report that's responding to the proposed budget. So instead of waiting until the last minute, I suggested a few dates that will help us track towards that deadline when we have to have the report to the board. And May 7th is when we would be presenting the report to the board. So we can, further discuss those now if we want, but I'm going to recommend that we work through this over email and I can send a doodle poll. Are there, any questions or anything that stands out for people right now?
Alexandra, can I ask you to add what day of the week those dates are and when you send it out, and perhaps add the date that we actually have to give the board office our report, which will precede probably by a week the May 7th date. So,
yep, absolutely. Those are good points. I will do that, Roger. Okay, I'll go ahead and move us along.
Also, I was wondering, don't we also have a student, Mo, that hasn't introduced himself yet?
Yes, and Mo let me know that he's not able to join tonight, so we'll have
I-
to.
Oh, okay, all right.
Okay, so our agenda for tonight, we have a few topics. As you all know, the CBRC's members of the CBRC wrote a review of the budget amendment. The budget amendment was voted on and approved by the board on Tuesday night. So we wanted to share and discuss this review and make sure it went in front of you. And then the next item would be discussing electing CBRC leadership for this school year. And potentially voting on that tonight if people are ready to vote and if we have a quorum here to take action on that. And then the last topic for tonight would be the Budget 101. So I'm going to go ahead and move us into our first agenda item, and this is here for discussion. So you all have this document in the email that I sent you. It's a 2-page document that a subset of CBRC members work together to craft, and it's organized similarly to our CBRC report on the budget in that it's organized in observations and recommendations. As you all know, this budget amendment this year was iterative, and staff engaged with CBRC multiple times on this topic, and some revisions were made to the amendment in different phases. So CBRC was, really flexible and accommodating in offering your time and insights here. So just wanted to make sure you all saw this, just go. I'll pause here on observations so that people can take this in. And then if there were any questions or further comments relevant to the observations, maybe we can take those first and then move to the recommendations. And Mariah, go ahead.
Do we know at this point with the reduction in the reserve fund balances, what that reserve will be at this point? Do we have a kind of ballpark estimate?
Myung or Juno, would you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, I can respond to it. So right now for fiscal year 24, our current year, we're looking to find around $10 million to kind of help build up our reserves and to make sure that we have to make sure that we have all of our potential like contract negotiations and stuff like that covered, and also to help kind of build up our fund balance or keep our fund balance high so that we can spend down that fund balance next year, because we'll have a larger gap next year, and that gap is looking to be about 41 million.
Yeah, super. So of our reserve balance this year, we're not touching that, or we're taking $10 million of the reserve balance that we had projected.
We will be using some of it this year, I believe. But we're trying to stay above the 5% minimum board requirement. And so we're trying to build it up above that 5% to help float next year.
Okay, super. If we could have those numbers shared, those projected numbers shared at the next meeting, that would be awesome. Thank you.
I'll just chime in. Mariah, you'll remember the reserve balance before the adoption of the 23-24 budget was in the 90 range, and about 50 or 60 million of that was tapped and was used in the adoption of that budget. What is being proposed is in the budget amendment that we put 10 million back into reserves to bolster the account so that it remains at 5%, so it will be in a better posture for addressing future needs. and gaps in the future.
Thank you, Roger, for refreshing my memory on that. I appreciate it. That's exactly what I was after.
And if I may, I can add a little bit more specificity as well. Hi, everybody. This is Myung Lee, Interim Deputy Superintendent of Business and Operations. Welcome, everybody, especially the new CBRC members. So just to add a specific number or two, if we were unsuccessful, we think we will be successful, but if we were not able to identify those $10 million of reductions or solutions in the rest of this fiscal year, our general fund ending balance would be about $61 million. And that's compared to a beginning fund balance of about 105 million for the year that we're in. And so if we are successful in identifying ways to reduce our expenses by a $10 million, that target that Juno and Roger mentioned, that we expect to end this year with about $71 million of an ending fund balance.
And for new members, we do have time set aside in our Budget 101 on this topic, so that we'll be describing in further detail the definitions around these and uses of contingency reserves, what we mean by fund balance. So more light on that will later this evening. Thank you for kicking us off with questions, Mariah. Anything else here on this slide around the observations that are focused on the forecast and fund balance? The next component of the subcommittee and CBRC's review of the budget amendment was focused on recommendations. I know there's a lot of text on this slide, so I'll summarize the bullet points and pause here so you all can read. This is suggesting that the district should monitor enrollment for changes beyond demographics, which budget projections were based. That information relevant to special revenues was not available when CBRC initially looked at this in December, and flagging that early literacy grant appropriations or funding may be available to offset some of the reductions that were required, or shifting funds between Gen Fund or Special Revenue Fund. Cuts should not affect instructional quality in the first year and allow time to adjust. The board should review how cuts will impact the attainment of the board goals, which are focused on student achievement and gaps. And if gap closing measures require reductions to direct service staffing, including school reconfigurations or closures, recommendation is that the board look for other areas of reductions, and it lists quite a few areas, and also importantly notes holding harmless student populations who have been impacted by these disruptions, and specifically schools serving historically and currently underserved students. So those were the 5 recommendations out of the in the budget amendment review. So I'll pause here for your questions, thoughts, reactions to that content. Maybe while you're thinking, I can comment on how this came together. So this was written by a kind of a sub team on the committee, and worked asynchronously in a document, populating this content. And so it was a collaborative effort from the group, and is actually similar to how the CBRC report has come together for years, where there's almost a task force or subcommittee within CBRC that is advancing the work together in a Google document. Director Sullivan, I know that you read and responded to this when we sent this out to the board. Do you have any further comments, reflections, or questions or feedback around these recommendations or observations? And you're still muted, I think.
Sorry. Yeah, they're pretty clear. I'm still not sure when these special revenues for early literacy are coming. We can't seem to get a handle on that. I know we have to pay something to get the money, so it's kind of a complicated procedure in itself. Yeah, and I guess just a question for me. This is trying to keep the reserve the whole time, right? All of these suggestions are still keeping our reserve where it is.
I'll speak to the early literacy questions that you noted. Our application for the early literacy grant just recently became available, and the team presented some content around that on Tuesday night. And you're right that there was a general fund match required for the early literacy grant. And then your comment around how these is your question related to how these recommendations are relevant to the reserve?
Yes, I guess it is. Yeah. Do any of these affect the reserves, or do we understand the reserve stays solid, or try to stay solid anyway?
As one of the contributors to this effort, we didn't speak to the reserve directly. It has been our recommendation as a CBRC to maintain or increase the reserves every year. So I don't think we directly spoke to that, but we are supportive of maintaining reserves to the extent possible. Primarily, as we indicate in here, because it seems like the enrollment projections are falling every year faster than otherwise anticipated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Sullivan. Aaron, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm coming into the late to the party or something on what the reserve function actually is. Is there a definition somewhere I should have read, or is it something that is expected to be used up, or is it an emergency fund? Where is it kept? Is it earning interest?
I understand this probably feels like inside baseball, and I was hoping to allude to that earlier when, you know, we're throwing around terminology that isn't, you know, so common and may even be more specific to our system, or people use these words in different ways. But our board has a reserve policy that requires that the district holds 5 to 10% of general fund revenue in reserve. And so that's what we're discussing here. Juno and Myung, do you want to, or two other folks on the team, if you want to round out that definition, and then the question on interest?
Yeah, so I can lean into that. So just like Alexandra said, our reserve policy is 5 to 10%. And there's another slide a little bit later on that will talk to this. It is a general recommendation that school districts budget about 10% in reserves to kind of float the first few months of the next year. So we got to keep the lights on, we got to pay the bills, we got to pay payroll and stuff like that. And so that reserve kind of helps pad that. Portland Public is such a large district that we don't necessarily need the full 10%. So the board has allowed that reserve to kind of range between 5 to 10% usually as a minimum. And the way that we budget those reserves in the general fund, we budget under a specific line item called contingency. Rather than what other school districts do, they usually budget in appropriated ending fund balance. Those are two separate line object codes. And the difference between that is contingency can still be used this year if a big emergency comes up. The board can vote to tap into it. Whereas unappropriated ending fund balance, we can't tap it into it at all. And so because our district is so large, that any kind of emergency could be a big emergency or a small emergency that we might need to tap into those funds early. And so we budget in contingency instead. On your point of investments, we do try to make sure that that we have cash on hand to pay any kind of necessary like bills right away, any kind of like payroll and stuff like that, to make sure that the district can keep functioning. But the rest of the dollars that we do have an opportunity to invest in like certain kind of like government bonds and stuff like that. I think I can't go into it too accurately, but what I know of it is like our treasurer invests those dollars into like certain kind of yield bonds.
That helps a lot. Thank you. Very, very much clarified.
Yeah, thank you. Any other, so we will delve more deeply into the district savings, ending fund balance, contingency, those kinds of topics later. Are there any other comments here around these, the budget amendment review? Okay. Hearing none, I think we can go ahead and move along. So the next topic we introduced in our November meeting when we last met on November 30th. And, you know, since then, there has been, you know, I know there have been some conversations or recommendations for our CBRC leadership, who we go through this process annually to define new CBRC leadership for that school year. So I'm going to kind of just open it up for you all to have, you know, there may be process questions initially for new members, or we may be ready to vote on this at this time. So I'm going to let you all discuss this topic now.
Well, as the existing chair, I told the committee in November, or the last time we met, I don't want to misstate the date, but I'm prepared to propose a slate, and I would like to see my co-chair, Mariah Hudson, assume the presiding role this next year, and to promote Tasha Ferguson from vice chair to be her co-chair. And then for vice chairs, I would like to nominate Grace Groom, who's one of the teachers on our committee, and I'd like to propose that Stefan Linder become also a vice chair, and so if the committee is so inclined, I would propose that we vote the 4 of those as a slate and move on.
I'm, Mariah, and Stefan kind of formulate their response. I just wanted to note that we don't have Taz here, this evening, and we also don't have Grace, and Grace isn't able to attend. So, without having them here to accept, maybe we can take this in phases. So, we could potentially vote, now if people accept,
Well,
those.
the only person who has not indicated their willingness to serve is Stefan, because heretofore he hasn't known that he's a proposed nominee, but the other three have all been privy and have indicated their willingness to serve, as I understand it.
Well, I'll just say, I would be happy to serve. Roger has some big shoes to fill, but I've enjoyed being his co-chair this year, and it probably benefits the committee to have someone who's been on and been through the budget cycle at least once, to help serve in this role. I would be happy to do that with Taz. If we're not able to elect Taz this evening as a co-chair, I would be happy to assume chair and then, revise that when she's available. I'll just say also kind of in terms of developing a letter, we had some discussion about this last year, and I think the sort of letter and presentation to the board that I would like to offer, this committee has been very supportive of, kind of student instructional time and positions and supporting that student experience. I think I would lead us in the same direction, and also leave room for acknowledgement if there are dissenting opinions within our report to offer that as an option as well, so that feels inclusive for everyone.
Stefan, would you like to respond to your nomination?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to step in, and thank you for your nomination. I think I enjoy being on this committee, and I'm happy to take a leading role on this. I think if you haven't been here last year, I think my emphasis general on big picture. That's I think where I can contribute most to. I'm not an educator or in educational realm. I think there are a couple of other things that are on my mind. If I were to do this, or if people were to vote for me, is I think I want to have an eye on this letter being comprehensive, but also being readable and concise in a way that it can be digested by the board. I also have an eye on how we present our material in a way that's I think during the public hearing that's some sort of like easy to follow, or like kind of makes the bigger pictures, and then offer some of the details that's just driven by my own professional background as someone who's doing public speaking relatively regularly.
Okay, so process-wise, we have two folks here who have, it sounds like, accepted nominations. So Mariah as co-chair and Stefan as vice chair. Without, I didn't hear from Taz affirming or responding to the suggestion that you made, Roger. And I also didn't see Grace do that either. And so for me, without seeing or hearing from them that they accept this responsibility, I don't.
If you're uncomfortable voting them, but both have expressed to me that Grace asked to be nominated, and Taz had indicated her interest in continuing to serve. So, but if you want to just vote on the two tonight, then let's do that, and we'll vote on the other two at the next meeting then.
Well, sorry, Roger, hearing further comments that you have discussed this with them, I feel a little bit differently. I didn't see that communication.
Well,
So,
without going through all the emails that I have gotten from this committee, it's in this chain somewhere, but
okay.
it'd take me a good hour to find them all.
Absolutely. So in that case, the proposal that Rogers brought forward suggests that Mariah is co-chair with Taz as co-chair and Stefan and Grace as vice chairs. So that would bring 4 people into leadership roles on CBRC. And we do have a quorum of members here tonight. So do we have someone who supports that and seconds that suggestion? Director Sullivan?
Yeah, I have a question. I think I'm not a voting member. Is that correct?
That's right. You're our board liaison. So that's
All right. Just wanted to be clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, we're going to second. I'll second. I'm going to take your recommendations.
It is challenging for new members to just get to know people and get to know roles. Thank you for taking that step, Erin. All right, so we can vote now. So you know, if I'm not sure actually how we should do this. If folks would like to come off mute and indicate a yes or no vote, including Luke, who is a voting member of CBRC, you're welcome to do so.
So why don't we just ask for a raise of hands and you see if you can see them on the screen, Alexander, and we'll go from there.
raise
I'm
hands,
voting
yeah.
for this slate.
That's great, like at school. Okay, and if you support that, Stefan, I can't, you know, your Zoom hand is up. Okay. Okay, so it looks like we do have agreement and we have a new slate of CBRC leadership this year. So that's great. Congratulations. So glad we made it through that milestone. And thank you for taking on these roles. And thank you to Roger for your longtime leadership on this group.
You're welcome, and I'll be happy to help and advise as we go along. And as I've already indicated that my term ends in June, and after 15 years, I'm going to step down. So anyway, that's the plan. So thank you very much. And Mariah, you're now in charge.
I'll let you finish out running the meeting if you care to.
Great. So I look forward to working a little bit more closely with you all. And I'll go ahead and move us along to our next topic. So this is our getting into our budget 101. So hopefully this is helpful for our new members as well as people who have been around. In terms of facilitation, if you have questions during this, I would encourage you to just raise your hand in the moment, and maybe we'll speak to the rest of the slide and then respond to your questions and not hold them till the end, because we are covering such a wide range of content relevant to the budget. And so this is just going to provide an overview, and it is quite oriented towards our budget book and what we present in the budget book. There are so many other topics that we could cover in budgeting. We could cover, performance or academic return on investment. There are a lot of things that we could touch on here and that are relevant to your work. But this is an overview that's starting to introduce you to or refresh the content that you'll see as we start to explore the budget further and the proposed budget. So the goal will be to inform you all about just some components of the budget. So our goals, including our board goals and the strategic plan forward together, the budget process, and then the funds in the PPS budget. So we'll cover how much funding PPS has, and this will be relevant to the current year because of course we're still formulating our budget for the following school year 24-25. We'll cover where PPS gets funding and how PPS uses funding. And within this, we are also focusing on school staffing and some of, when we say how PPS uses funding, it will cover how that manifests at schools. Okay, and I believe I'm passing it along to you, Myung, here for the for our why and strategic plan and board goals.
Thank you, Alexandra. And again, thanks everybody for your engagement always in every meeting and including tonight. And especially for new members or newer members of the CBRC, we wanted to frame the rest of this briefing about the district's budget with this discussion about why and the big picture guiding principles and links to why we're all engaged in the work that we're doing, whether on the Board of Education or district staff or interested and engaged community members like yourselves, and in some cases student community members volunteering your time to improve our processes and our collective decision making. So first slide here is a statement of the district's vision, of our community's vision, that a graduate of Portland Public Schools will be a compassionate, critical thinker, able to collaborate and solve problems, and be prepared to lead a more socially just world. Hopefully that that resonates, and there is a lot of really thoughtful work has gone into developing more detailed articulations of all of these frameworks, including related to this vision, the graduate portrait, and we can point you to how to find these documents outside of this meeting. I personally find this very centering, grounding, and inspiring. So if you haven't engaged with the graduate portrait, then definitely recommend that you take a little time to do that. Next is our theory of action. And again, I'm happy to just read this and give a little voiceover as folks remind themselves or orient themselves to this, that if we braid racial equity and social justice strategies into our instructional core work with our students, teachers, and content, and build our organizational culture and capacity to create a strong foundation to support every student, then we will reimagine Portland Public Schools to ensure every student, especially our Black and Native American students who experience the greatest barriers, realize the vision of the graduate portrait. So again, theory of action is usually expressed as an if-then statement. If we do this, then these other desired outcomes will flow. So a lot of work has gone into articulating that relationship between actions and results. And then this is a really high level summary of a great deal of work that was done a few years ago in developing PPS's strategic plan, Forward Together. And you can see on the left-hand side 4 major themes: racial equity and social justice, inclusive and differentiated learning for every child, embracing change, and professional excellence and support. And on the right hand, where the graphic is, you can see those 4 themes on the outside ring of this graphic. And in the little teeny print on the inside, you can see specific strategies that are named under those broader categories. And again, this is very broad introduction here tonight. But if anyone has not yet had a chance to look through the strategic plan, to look through Forward Together, would definitely recommend doing that. Alexander, is that a link?
Yep,
in-
so that is a link to our strategic plan.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So there is a lot of content, a lot of information underneath each of these 4 themes, and descriptions of the strategies in the finer print. And again, would recommend spending some time, even if it's, half an hour or an hour, looking through that document when you have some time, when you have a chance, perhaps on a snowy, cold day in the next few days, might be an option. But to really engage with this work, which was developed by a community process, community-wide process.
Yeah, I might add that, that was developed over, roughly about a period of a year's time. And there was a lot of community involvement in the process. And there were some of us who were actual delegates or whatever. That anyway, it was a long time getting adopted, and a great effort to involve the community in its development.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roger. And the document that's linked, that the strategic plan document, actually includes a very helpful description of the process that Roger alluded to. So how the process was undertaken, the ways that different community members contributed thinking, the structures, the facilitation techniques that were used. And as with all complex undertakings, how it's done, how a body of work is undertaken, and who has roles in that, who contributes to that, is often as important as the work that results from it. So actually, the CBRC, I think, represents a really important example of multiple voices in a community contributing to decision making and inclusive processes. So thanks for mentioning that, Roger, and definitely would recommend, as you review the strategic plan, spending a few minutes in the opening pages that describe that process. Then the last slide that I'm going to speak to has to do with the board goals. And again, I think there's a link to more details about this, but several years ago, the board of directors adopted 4 broad student outcome goals, and they are revisited. The specific measures or metrics are revisited from time to time, and that the board, I can tell you firsthand, if folks haven't seen the board engage around student outcomes, they engage very deeply and throughout the year, looking at results, looking at strategies that drive results, and pay a lot of attention to what's happening with students and what adults are how adults are organizing their time and strategic thinking to get the results that we're all hoping for. So those are the 4 broad goals. And again, we're going through this pretty fast, but I would definitely recommend looking at that link and looking at some of the details, including the specific measures and these are broken down by individual groups of student populations and discussing the specific goals underneath each of these measures. So with that, I'll pass it back to Alexandra. I'm not sure if it's you next or.
I was wanted to mention around board goals that the CBRC is tasked with evaluating the proposed budget to describe and provide observations and recommendations through the lens of how does the budget support the board goals. So it is essential that we are all aware of this lens and what the CBRC's tasked with doing. Okay, so I want to cover the budget. Oh, sorry, Director Sullivan, go ahead.
Yeah, if you weren't at the board meeting Tuesday night, you might want to watch it. They really had a great presentation. The staff had a great presentation about the new math program. And that was discussed very thoroughly. And a lot of questions from the board. It was getting late and everybody wanted to go, but we couldn't stop talking about it. So it's kind of late in the meeting. But when you said the board really is paying attention, that's true. You know, it's kind of hard to know as a board member exactly what you can do about it, but you want to really support the new things that are happening. So anyway, that would be a really good thing to watch. It was very exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I was there for that, and the presentation was on the math curriculum adoption, and that was a great presentation. So, sorry, Roger, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I was at the board meeting, but I left after we adopted the budget amendment. And Patty, you are learning by baptism of fire this year that being a board member can entail hours and hours and hours a week. Alexander informed me that the board meeting went till 10:30 last Tuesday night. So thank you for the tip that it comes late in the meeting. So
Yeah, you don't have to watch the whole thing.
make it easier to find. Thank you.
Hey, so this slide, you know, it shows a cycle, and budgeting is a continuous process. So we are recalibrating and monitoring throughout the year, and a lot of work goes into developing the following year budget almost immediately after we adopt our budget for the current year. So I'm going to start at the top right in the light blue. So these months are approximate, and sometimes in annual planning there are shifts in these. So this is approximately what you can expect from this process, as much as it can be repeatable. In the fall, summer time, July through September, we're beginning our fiscal year. So we would have just adopted a budget that would start July 1st. So our current budget year is starting fiscal new year, and there's still a lot of activity, financial activity happening. So the prior fiscal year is closing on the back end with the finance team. That is a big lift, and people are getting ready for the audit during that period, as well as getting school set up for the year. So there's a lot of activity that happens on the finance side over summer. And then going into fall, October, November, We've described this as budget awareness. And so during that time, we will adopt a budget calendar. This is a required component of our process that sets out the milestones that we need to go through to adopt the budget. And that budget calendar is available on the next slide. At that same time, we're starting to engage data. So we have enrollment projections and a financial forecast during that time. So we have a sense at that time of what our general fund resources will be. And we're starting to kind of formulate early ideas of what the budget will look like. In winter, so December through March, we're really in budget planning. So that's really when the work kicks off in earnest, and staffing planning and budget priorities are determined during that time. We conduct budget outreach, including with this group. And oftentimes that's when we have a budget amendment, but that could happen at any time during this process, either when it's required because we are at risk of exceeding appropriations, or for any other extenuating circumstance, the budget amendment can happen at other times. But oftentimes, and especially in the last couple of years, it has been December, through March is when we first amend the budget. April through June, we've described this as budget building. So that is when we see a lot of our communications and deliverables going out to the community, and decisions are starting to be finalized around the budget. So the proposed budget goes to our board in April and goes to the CBRC as well, so that you can formulate your review of that. The CBRC report is named on this timeline. And we have budget work sessions with the board, which also includes CBRC for some of those sessions. Then that's focused around the proposed budget. And then we move into a phase called the approved budget. And so the budget goes to our board again after they've taken in community feedback, they've had other conversations and work sessions, and then the approved budget is voted on. Following that, we have a body called the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission. And this body is tasked with reviewing and certifying the approved budget. So we are not able to move forward and adopt our budget until the TSCC conducts their work. And we have a hearing with TSCC where they're asking questions that are not just focused on kind of taxing components of budgeting, but it could be a wide range of topics that are relevant to the jurisdiction that they're working with, and they work with many jurisdictions in in Oregon. And then we would finally adopt the budget. So the budget must be adopted by June 30th. In recent years, we have looked towards one of the first board meetings in June to schedule that and to adopt the budget so that we have plenty of time to kind of start implementing the budget before July 1st, when we will need to have that budget ready to load into our systems and move forward from there. So, and then we would be back where we started. I don't think there are any questions on this process component. Stefan, yes.
Sorry, I couldn't find the button. Just want to quickly ask. So one thing what I couldn't find here is where does the state fund allocations come into play? So this looks like your just internal process, but the budget, PBS budget, is dependent on external factors, such as one of the biggest things is what the state determines. And then the other one, I think there's a couple of other ones, right? So property tax, the local level, depends on those numbers coming in. So how does that come into play here?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. As you know, our state as biennial budgets. And I've seen that sometimes the legislative cycle provides a different timeline for us. So for example, as you know, some of you know from being on the committee, we didn't have that finalized biennial amount for state school fund until after we started the fiscal year. And so we had used, you know, an overall estimate when formulating the budget. And then that is partially what caused us to amend the budget. So there are inputs and projections being incorporated into the budget, you know, coming from different, you know, from the federal level, and as well as at the state level that are incorporated. And then at a certain point, we say pencils down and we have the best sense of what we think the revenue will be. But I want to pause and let Juno or Myung or Tu, if there was anything else that you would want to mention to round out that response.
I see Roger's hand up. You're
Are you
muted.
muted?
You're muted, Roger. Still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now? Each year in October, school districts certify their enrollments to the state, and it is not until they have received that number do we receive the amount of money that the state will allocate to support our budget. And so that's an exercise that usually the board is waiting to amend its budget if it's necessary based on those enrollment figures. And so a budget amendment might occur as early as in November, or as was happened, it got extended due to the lateness of the legislative action till January. But that's what typically a budget year accounts for. I also have long recommended CBRC members, if at all possible, to monitor what the board is doing throughout the year, because as they adopt policies, if they have fiscal ramifications, they are really act as instructions to your superintendent in the preparation of the budget. So
And to further expound upon that, we do give updated numbers multiple times a year. So another slide that we'll get to a little bit later on is all about our ADMW, or average daily membership. And that lets the state know what our portion of the pie is. And so as that number becomes refined throughout the year, it becomes updated, and our overall allocation gets updated as well. With regards to our local option levy, I don't remember off the top of my head exactly when it comes in, but I believe the bulk of it comes in twice a year. Our federal funding usually comes in around November, so that's when a lot of that funding comes in. And yes, our state school funding usually comes in the fall. Another reason why we have a reserve to float us until then.
And you're touching on those cash flow components of it. So when do we get it? When do we receive it in the current year? And then I think the I'm not sure, Stefan, if the question was relevant to when do we become aware of that in budgeting? So those are two different topics. But we will go into this further. Okay, I'm going to move us along. This is a link here, and it does show, but I know in very small text, the budget calendar. And the headline here is that these are our required engagements and and votes with the board. So it includes community engagements, work sessions, hearings, adopting this calendar, adopting CBRC members. So this is a really high level but helpful view into what the process looks like to adopt the budget. Okay, and I'm going to pass it along to Juno to cover most of this content and budget.
Thanks, Alexandra. Good evening, everyone. So I'll try to be cognizant of the time and try to kind of fly through these slides. But if I'm going too fast, please let me know and we can cover any questions that you might have. First and foremost, the budget basics. The budget is a district plan. It's a plan. So plans change, but the budget is built upon the best data that we have at the time. And then the budget is built around funds, and we have 5 major funds that the district uses. And then the appropriations, which is a word most of you may know. Of those that you don't, that's our legal appropriation. That is our legal amount to which we can spend. And so that appropriation level is built by major fund and major function, and we'll cover that a little bit more in a little bit. And then, so the main idea is the fund is the resource. That's where the money is. The function describes the purpose or services for which we spend on those items. And then the object describes the specific thing that we are purchasing. Next slide, please. And the schedule of appropriations, again, this is essentially our legal budget. This is what we are allowed to spend and within certain categories. So as you can see on that little bit excerpt, we have the general funds and we have resources and requirements. This is what we are legally allowed to spend for the district. If we go over that limit, we need to do a budget amendment to account for that extra expense. Next slide.
We had discussed a homework assignment for CBRC. So you all can access our adopted budget on our website, and you all have the proposed budget, or many of you have a hard copy of the proposed budget as well, where you will see a similar schedule of appropriations. But if you can locate this page in the document and start to review, you can see the different funds and those major function categories that are in the document. So please go ahead and go forth and do a very small amount of homework to locate these pages in the document.
Great. So how much money does PPS have? We have about a little over $2 billion in our adopted budget for this fiscal year. We can see that the bulk of it is sitting in the general fund and the capital projects fund. The capital projects fund is what funds all of the school remodels and all the other capital projects that we have, mostly funded out of our GO bonds. The more flexible unrestricted monies are the general fund. These are our unrestricted operating funds, as well as our restricted funds, which are the special revenue funds, which is that second column. And so of the next slide, please. So often when we talk about our operating funds, we talk about both the general fund and the special revenue fund together. Any questions? All right, great. This slide does a great job of depicting just that. The purple are all the different resources that flow into the general fund, and then the blue circles there are all the different resources that flow into the special revenue fund. The sizes of the circles aren't accurately depicting the dollar amounts, but yes, this graphic does kind of give you the bulk of where our resources come from. Next slide, please. This pie is the adopted budget, all funds by major funds. So you can see the pie wedge of the general fund, which is in blue there, which is 38% of our overall all funds budget. That big green wedge is going to be that capital projects fund. We have recently gone out for geo bonds to help, remodel and renovate our schools and make some upgrades to schools that are sorely needed. And so you can see that that's a big chunk, but those dollars you should keep in mind they are specifically geared towards that purpose. Next slide, please. And here is all of our FTE by major function. So this is all funds again. You can see that in the blue there, that's for all of our direct instruction. So you can see that 55.2% of our FTE go toward direct instruction. And then the other large group is the 40% of support services. The support services is a really broad category. It encompasses student-facing positions, the majority of which are student-facing positions, but also includes kind of the central operation administrative tasks as well. The 3000s are our community services. This includes like any kind of community agents, as well as the bulk being our nutrition workers, so our lunch people. And then that little green sliver are any kind of like acquisitions or construction that is needed. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is all funds broken down by object. So remember again, like the last one was about broken down by function. This one is broken down by object. So these are the actual expenses. So you can see we break out the individual FTE groups individually. So you can see the license salaries, classified, non-rep, administrator. Other salaries include like substitute costs and extra extended hours and so on. You can see the 200s are associated payroll costs. That's going to be like PERS and Social Security, workers' comp, health insurance will be in there as well. We have purchase services, which is our contracts for services. And 400s are supplies and materials. And you can see 500 is capital outlay. That's going to, the bulk of that is going to be towards, is going to be related to those capital projects. So that's why that category is so large. And then you see our other objects, transfers, and our operating contingency. And then for the funds with which we have budget ending fund balance, we have the item there as well. On this slide, this is all of our FTE by those individual objects. So if we separate all the salary FTE of that previous pie out just by themselves, this is what it looks like. We spend 55.9% of all of our FTE on licensed salaries, another 31% on classified, and so on. I'll kind of pause there to see if there's any questions. Yes, Stefan.
Yeah, just a quick question. So or clarification, what is it, the capital projects funds, does that also get, is that also financed through state school funds, local property taxes, those kind of sources, or was different sources?
These are mostly paid out of our geo bonds, which are proposed and go to vote to the public, and then are funded through a debt schedule. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Luke.
Yeah, for the FTE funding slide, that kind of showed the proportion among like how we pay different positions. Is this in representation of how much money or budget we allocate to that, or in representation of how many educators or administrators are working in a certain field?
That's a good question, and this is showing the count of FTE and not the dollars that are supported.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. They are related, of course, but a lot of positions aren't necessarily full-time positions. So that in the blue there, that 3,493 doesn't necessarily mean 3,493 headcount. It could be 5,000 positions with several positions that are like 0.5 FTE or so on. So, right. Any other questions?
Yes.
Aaron?
What's the difference between the classified represented and non-represented staff?
Yeah, good question. The non-represented staff are not represented by a union,
Okay.
and the classified are represented. The classified usually encompass a lot of our non-licensed, for the most part, student-facing positions. So things like educational assistants, nutrition services people, custodial, bus drivers, all of those types of positions.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Oh, yeah, I did. So then who is the non-represented staff? What
Oh,
people?
yeah, of course. Yeah, so the non-represented staff would be those that don't fall within a contract. So non-represented who are not administrators are people like clerks, people like analysts. They work throughout the school district. Some are things like business managers at high schools. It's a pretty wide range of staff. A lot of clerk and operational type positions.
Hmm.
Great question. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, great. So what are title CSI and TSI schools? So we do have a lot of federal dollars that come in, and it's a essential part of our budget. It's about 10% of our budget usually. And so we do have specific restrictions for those federal dollars. And one of the main ones is at the Every Student Succeeds Act. And this act utilizes identification of schools which are classified as CSI or TSI schools and or which require title funding. And so these are dollars that we get from the federal government that would help us enhance education for those students who need that extra boost. Next slide, please.
I just would suggest, wait a minute, I'll raise my hand. I would suggest maybe you spell out what the acronyms mean.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. And the next slide does do that. So the CSI is the comprehensive support and improvement. This is if a entire school needs kind of support. Whereas the targeted support and improvement, or the TSI, is usually a group of students that need that extra little support. And so that is a targeted kind of support for that group of students. And then the federal title programs is a federal designation for that as well that receives additional title funding. Any other questions on title CSI or TSI schools? We do have about 33 schools designated as either Title CSI or TSI currently, that number is going to go up next year to, I believe, 38, I want to say, and also includes a couple of high schools, which we haven't had before. So it'll be a pretty interesting shift. Next slide, please. So of the federal grants, the large ones are Title I, which is mostly about improving the academic achievement of the disadvantaged. Title II focuses on training, so professional development and training high quality teachers. Title III focuses on our ELL students, and Title IV focuses on our Indigenous population. Next slide, please. So staffing. So as part of the staffing formula, we always look at enrollment. Enrollment is one of the biggest factors for which we receive funding. The first number that we look at is our ADMW. That is our average daily membership that's weighted. So what that means is our ADM or ADMR is our real number. So that's our head count. Our ADMW also adds an additional weights for ESL students and special education students so that we get additional resources for students that qualify for that. So we receive funds based off of our ADMW in the form of our state school fund. And so the ADMW is one of those numbers that is updated like 3-4 times a year to what Roger was talking about earlier. October is our first major submission for ADMW because early October is when we get our actual enrollment. Up until then, everything is an estimate of what our enrollment will be. So October becomes our first kind of real picture of like students and seats. We also have 2 other main periods. So October enrollment is the first biggest one. We just submitted our second one, which is what we call period 2. It's our December numbers. It kind of gives the state an update on our enrollment, and then our final major one is in June when we give when we get the June ratio, and then that is kind of like our end of the year. This is our final enrollment numbers. Let me see. In addition to that, so and when the state receives all of our submissions from all the school districts around, that will be the pie, the weight for each district, and then they will portion out the state school fund accordingly. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Director Sullivan.
Yes, so that means it's not apportioned out finally until June? The end of it?
No, yeah, sorry, that was a little misleading. So we do receive it throughout the year. Our first estimate, so the estimate that we put out just now, it was for both fiscal year 24, which is the period 2 data, our December numbers, as well as our forecast for fiscal year 25, our initial forecast. And then once we get into the spring, those numbers for next year will be refined a little bit more, and we will be truing up fiscal year 24 as well. And then come May, we will also be getting our what they call May surprise, are any kind of adjustments for last fiscal year based off of our June ratio. So we've already sent finalized numbers in, and so we'll see the results of that come May. But to your question, we do receive funding from the fall onward for state school fund, but the amount that we receive changes slightly due to any of these adjustments as we give them updated numbers.
So we get paid 3 times a year, kind of.
We get paid every month, but we get a couple of bulk payments. And I think and they're usually pretty even. Our June is a double payment to help account for the way that our fiscal year falls. And then in May, we get like an adjusting payment as well. And that's the one that kind of trues up the previous year, kind of makes up a little bit for the current year as well.
Okay, we never have to pay any back though, because we.
I like to think that we do a good enough job estimating that hopefully we don't get to the point where we need to pay anything back. Yes, but it can happen, and it has happened in PPS's past.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Roger.
I was a question. Federal dollars of IDA funding supports special ed, and historically, when that act was enacted in early 70s, federal government promised to pay 40%, and they've never exceeded 10%. And so, is my understanding. What is the current level of funding, and then how many extra dollars does the district have to appropriate to support those programs?
That's a great question. I am not I don't have those numbers at the forefront of my mind, but I can definitely get you those answers for sure. I do know that there is because IDEA is currently projected to hold flat. That is actually going to be to our detriment, since cost of staff wages have gone up. So that means the same amount of money is going to be stretched thinner. So that means that we will have to lean on other resources than IDEA to achieve the same services. Yeah. Thanks. Next slide, please. So this table gives you an idea of the kind of the staffing formula that's specifically targeted to CSI schools and title schools, as opposed to other schools. So we do try to target smaller class sizes for CSI and title schools. And then you can see the other schools on the right hand side there. So that's what our normal kind of target class sizes are. Any questions on this?
Where do the target class sizes come from? Just, I mean, I can tell you from experiencing these sizes right now that these are large. These are very large.
Yes. So these come from our like as a part of our core curriculum in conjunction with our which informs our staffing formula. And so it's based on a lot of factors, but primarily on both enrollment and what core curriculum that we provide to the schools. And there are probably other people who can articulate a lot better than I am right now on how these numbers come to be.
I will say, Aaron, that we've never been able to align, I don't think here in PPS, with the quality schools metrics at the state level, which would be smaller class sizes. And I've got a kid in a first grade class with 30 kids. I can tell you it's a lot.
30 kids.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Oof, that's a lot. I'm sorry.
I wanted to note that I'm linking the content linked here provides much more information on school staffing. So they're in the informational section in our budget books. We have content that's relevant to this so that you can further explore, you know, find more tables similar to this for other grade bands. And it's also linking to the individual school reports that are in volume 2. And that is a good way to kind of compare the schools across the district, and you can see their different designations and how that has impacted the resources and FTE that you see at the schools. Luke?
Yeah, I'm interested to know a little bit more about, like, do we have averages for class sizes as someone who's been a part of a 30-person class, and also as just mentioned, you know, it seems to be pretty frequent. So is there more specifics on the ranges?
Yes, we do have another chart that actually depicts just what you're asking. But it's not in this slide deck. But it does do a really good job depicting like what our average class size is across the district, and how the majority of our class sizes fall like right within the middle of the range. Not to say that there aren't exceptions both on the high end and the low end across the district. But I think it was something like 60 to 70% of the classes like fall within like the middle range. And that slide, I believe, has been presented to the board a few times, but it's definitely information that I think that we can provide to you as well, for sure.
Yeah, I can take that as a takeaway.
Yeah.
To send that out.
This is, yeah, thank you so much, Alexandra. This is an excerpt from our volume 2. This is kind of what we call our heat map. This kind of tells you the adjustments year over year to our student population across all of our schools. I would suggest to take a look at volume 2. It's near the front of volume 2, and can give you a really good idea of what our student populations have trended over the years. Next slide, please. And this is where we'll kind of go over what we mentioned before, like what's our savings account, what is our reserves, what does that mean? Next slide. So we have, you might recognize terms like expenditures or expenses, and revenues or income. So our expenditures are just that. There are expenses, what we spend on, and our revenues are our income. These are the new dollars that are coming in. But in budgeting, we also have terms called resources and requirements. And this is what we are called to balance. So we have to balance our resources to our requirements. So our resources include our revenue, but also include our beginning fund balance. These are the dollars that rolled over from previous year that went unspent. And then our requirements are the opposite of that. There are expenses or our expenditures, which includes our operating contingency, which I'll go into a little bit. And then so our expenditures plus our ending fund balance makes up our requirements. So again, our resources have to balance to our requirements whenever we propose our budget. Our reserves are the operating contingency plus our ending fund balance, and that needs to be 5 to 10% of our general fund revenue. Again, we tend not to budget for ending fund balance because of the size of our district, and for any emergencies, big or small, we want to make that pool of reserve dollars accessible to the board in case of an emergency. Yes, Roger first.
Obviously, in the committee, we've had a difficulty in understanding when the board adopted the existing policy, it used the term reserves. And as you may discern, our budget people are more accustomed to using ending balances and those types of terms. Lay people might refer to the green eye shade terminology, but the existing policy that was adopted by the board was done so at the behest of CBRC quite a number of years ago, but it was both when Ailey Lowry was a board member, a CBRC member, and so was Rita Moore, and it was based on the Fiscal Officers Association recommendations, which actually exceed the 10%. It goes all the way up to 15 and 20%. But the board adopted a policy that with a target of 10% at the highest and at a minimum of 5%, and so that's where we are right now. So
Thank you for that history, Roger. Appreciate that. Stefan.
Yeah, so just to clarification, so balance here is that the reserve? Is the reserve 5% of the general revenue?
Yes, our reserves policy is to make sure that we have 5 to 10% to carry over to the next year, our fund balance.
Well, you're using different terms. So the reserve is operating contingency and the ending fund balance. So is the ending fund balance 5% of the general funds, or the both together, operating contingency and ending fund balance?
I understand the confusion. With regards to the terminology, the reserves mean both operating contingency and ending fund balance combined needs to be 5 to 10%. It just so happens that in our general fund, we don't budget for ending fund balance, and we haven't since I've been at PPS, and we've put all of that money into an operating contingency instead, to allow the board to be able to tap into it in case of an emergency. Again, if we budgeted in ending fund balance, the board would not be able to tap into that money at all, even during an emergency.
Okay, so just to be clear, the 5% refers to reserves.
Correct.
So the reserves needs to be at least 5% of the general fund revenue.
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. Mariah?
I'll just share a thought for the benefit, especially of our newer members, that reserve fund balances in large organizations like this are really helpful, because especially when we're budgeting in 2-year cycles with the legislature, if we have down years and we have declining demographics or other, kind of economic headwinds, this helps us preserve jobs, especially with educators and skilled professionals. It can be expensive to rehire them. So not only is it good for people and kids, it's, financially kind of has been a good strategy. So just offering that as context.
That's a really great point. Thank you. All right, next slide, please. And we'll go into the definitions a little bit more. Again, ending fund balance is specifically set aside for the next year. So in some of our other funds, like our 200 funds, our 400 funds, we do have ending fund balances that we specifically reserve for the next year that can't be touched this year. Our contingencies are just that. If there is an emergency, we can tap into it. However, the purpose for our contingencies in the general fund is to carry over to the next year as the reserve. Yes, Roger, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to add that in some respects, reserves or the monies that are in this contingency account are used as a backup for insurance, because a district like Portland Public Schools is self-insured up to a small amount. In my term on the committee, we had an elementary school that had a big fire, and for example, the contingency amounts were tapped to help remodel or put that school back in operation, which took about a 3-year period. So
That's great to know. Thank you. Stefan.
Yeah, so for all the questions. Another clarifying question. So contingencies are what I can think of as saving that's carried over, right? It shows up in the budget as an expenditure by construction, right? So it's like, it's kind of, can I think of it as an unrealized expenditure?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great way to think about it. Yes. For PPS's purposes, it's an unrealized expenditure, one that we don't expect to actually expend. It's just the way that the Oregon Department of Education classifies contingency as an expenditure rather than an appropriated or unappropriated ending fund balance. Correct. Yeah, that's a great way to think of it. Luke.
Yeah, again, in regard to contingencies, I'm wondering how these expenditures are different from what we would take from the reserve budget.
So the contingencies are our reserve budget. And so again, like, yeah, they're the same thing. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Any other questions? All right. And then, yes, so the next slide kind of reiterates the term that we use as reserves. And then also links to our school board policy, which defines that 5 to 10%, which you can go to at your leisure. And the last slide. And so this is where everything kind of ties together with regards to our contingencies and unappropriated fund balances for all the funds act as the beginning fund balance for the next fiscal year. And that's it. Thanks. Any other questions, comments, musings?
Just want to say this was really helpful. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
walking us
absolutely.
through this and answering all the questions.
And please feel free to contact me with any other questions or set up a meet with me if you want to go into more depth on any of these topics.
May I also just, sorry, Alexandra, can I just want to elaborate on some of the suggestions that we've been making about all the quote unquote homework? So we know that you're doing this as volunteers, and that is a big time commitment and an important service you're providing on behalf of the PPS community. And so that's we don't take that lightly at all and really appreciate it. So the references to you know, a little bit of the self-study, all these links, I just want to sort of put that in context a little bit. That's we're not trying to overwhelm anybody and or put undue pressure on folks to, you know, spend hours and hours and hours of your time, your valuable time, on, you know, in a certain time frame or anything like that. We just, I think Alexandra, Juno, um, and I just wanted to offer sort of go-to resources, especially to the new members, to when you have some time to, and if you're interested and so inclined to look through some of these documents in more detail. We just wanted to put it all together since this was a billed as a 101. So if if you have an interest and some time to either look at the strategic plan or the graduate portrait or these budget documents in more detail, since this is an on-ramp for the CBRC, including new members, we just wanted to put it all in one place for you. So didn't mean to overload you with too much homework too soon.
I'm not able to link in I downloaded the slide deck in the PDF. But I don't know. I don't think I've ever actually seen the budget. And I was looking through my emails to see if I missed it. How do I link to that stuff?
If the links weren't working in the PDF, I'll take a look and I can add the links and resend it. The budget, you could, it'll come up if you Google adopted budget PPS.
Okay.
Or pps.net/budget will also take you to the page as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Myung, for setting expectations for this team. And I agree, we appreciate you so much as volunteers here. So anything that we can do to further help and shed light before reviewing the proposed budget and all the messaging, I know that is a huge lift and feels like drinking from the fire hose when you first start to take in all of the information. So as much as we can help ahead of that time, let us know. So this was our final component of the meeting, and we usually will time for additional Q&A and go to the order, and then we close. I'm noting that Adriel, one of our new members, is here, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Adriel, if you're not in a good spot to introduce yourself, but since you did join, if you would want to introduce yourself to this team.
Hi, I am so sorry. I was working late and trying to prepare for pending weather issues tomorrow. So I apologize for leaving you all without my presence. I am former director of youth services at POIC, new director of before and after school programming at Campfire. I am a parent, a PPS elementary school parent, and just happy to be here, really just wanting to learn more about the process. I've been reading through all of the things that have been emailed. It does feel a little bit like water hose drinking, but I'm hopeful that it'll give me the foundation that I need to be impactful in this work that we're doing. Thank you. I don't feel it all on the spot, but I am driving, which is why you cannot see me. So yes, thank you for the work that you all are doing and helping us and preparing us.
Thank you so much for joining while you're driving. I appreciate that. Okay, so Roger, I can turn it over to you if you want to kind of go through, if there's any lingering questions and anything else for the good of the order, and then kind of close us out and conclude for the evening. You're muted again.
Yeah, I'm trying. Okay. I would ask you to please remind us how to get to the Q&A document so committee members can begin to ask questions and get responses from staff, and that the board also has access to that at the same time. And I thank you very much for your presentations this evening, and for committee's members attending. And we only differ from board members themselves in that we're not compensated, and the hours that we put in are gratis, and as I acknowledged earlier in the evening to Patty, she's already been baptized to learn that board members can sometimes put in 40-hour weeks of volunteer time just to serve in this public capacity. So I thank you very much. Actually, Mariah should be closing the meeting because she's now the chair. So.
Thank you, Roger. Well, thank you for your many years of diligent service here on this board. And you're still serving through the end of the year. You're just stepping down as chair. So we look forward to you. If we don't have any further commentary, I'll give just a minute. Okay, hearing none, we'll conclude our meeting today. Thank you.